USA Carry podcast. I'm your host, Sal. With me tonight is Luke, head honcho at USA Carry, my partner in crime with you tonight. And we have a guest tonight, Annette Evans, who has been gracious enough to be a guest on previous iterations and different shows we've done in the past. A real wealth of information. Annette, introduce yourself to our audience for those who don't know you. I'm sure a lot are familiar with you, but tell everybody what you do.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Annette Evans. I am the person behind On Her Own, which is a place where I explore and talk about what it takes to manage life on your own when you don't have traditional support structures. Really geared at women. I'm told a lot of men are getting a lot out of it as well. It's not as active as I've been in the past, but all that content's still out there. And I actually have a series coming out right now with In Range TV on the YouTube channel.
Nice.
Okay. And just so everybody realizes, Annette literally does everything in the sphere of self-defense. So that's why we've liked our conversations with her in the past, as far as an overall spectrum of not just women specific. I've said for a long time, I've been reading On Her Own since she started it, and it's a wealth of information. A lot of this is very universal to men and women, but you do indeed focus on some of those things that become more specific to female self-defense. You do everything. You do martial arts, jiu-jitsu. You're a high-level shooter. So tell us a little bit about how great you are at all of that stuff, or I'll tell everybody if you don't.
Well, I've been around this field for a hot minute. I try not to think about how long anymore. I've been shooting since the late 2000s, 20-aughts, however they're calling them now. I started competitive shooting in 2010. I shot for a major manufacturer in the mid-2010s. And I've kind of taken that all the way up through, I have a couple of ladies titles here in the East Coast and the Northeast. I also shoot a lot on the defensive side. So I have a couple of Game Boy light pins. I currently hold the ladies Casino Joe record for Range Master. That's the shooting side. I also do, I've been working a lot on the combative side as well. So I've taken Craig Douglas's entire catalog of classes. I am a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. That's actually where I spend most of my time these days. Some folks will remember me as the author of the Dry Fire Primer, which is still selling quite well.
Sure.
It's a little introduction to how to dry fire and how to get the most out of it. And I'm told that anyone from beginners to dry fire to people who have kind of plateaued are getting a lot out of it still, which I find it's really cool.
Right. So Annette kind of runs the gamut of the overall skill set, which is really interesting. She's not just a shooter, not just a combatives person. So I think that gives people good perspective on this. A lot of people tend to specialize, high-level shooters or, strictly jiu-jitsu guys who are on the mat all the time. When you get somebody who does everything, sometimes there's good perspective to be offered as far as what this really looks like, what skills are really necessary and important to self-preservation. With that said, Annette, I'm sure you're watching headlines all the time. As things get crazy, and it seems things are escalating as far as violent crime. Now, we come back to, I'm not so sure how true that is. There's certainly an uptick that we can quantify in the past few years compared to basically the 1993 and beyond. We had at least as far as what was recorded, 1993 was actually the most violent year in this country's history, and a lot of people don't realize that. And then we had a significant decline for many, many years. Starting with 2020, we've seen an upward tick again, 2020, 2021. Coming out of COVID, things were locked down, society acts crazy. So we're still at the point where we are beyond the 2019 and previous numbers. There's no denying that. But from what you've been looking at, and even if we want to look at the, specifically from the female lens, things that may be more targeted to women, are you seeing anything that's particularly different, that's changed as far as this overall threat profile of violent crime?
So one thing I've found very interesting, and I think we're all familiar now with the social media news algorithms. So there's certainly that heightened sense of there's more going on. we're paying attention to these incidents, so we're looking for more of them. But really, the biggest jump I've seen that's really concerned me the most is it looks like there's been a big spike in domestic violence through the COVID years, especially in the beginning when everybody was locked down and really didn't have a chance to get away from abusers or people getting into more violent relationships because of the stress of the lockdown and now the stress of the economic stress and everything else. So that's actually becoming an area of great concern, as well as that random street crime that we're all hearing about that seems to have some copycatting going on and that seems to have a lot of sort of social media contagion, both in terms of people committing those acts and in terms of people paying attention to the fact that they're happening.
Mm-hmm. You wade into something interesting with the aftermath of the COVID lockdowns, things that changed socially that we're still paying the price for. And without even wading into the conspiracies on either side, like the vaccine itself, has that caused a health danger, etc. Things we definitely know there are fallout with the increase of drinking, increased drug use, as people were literally locked down over the duration of the better part of a year. And certainly the domestic violence issue you just mentioned, that, the spike in that was enormous. So from what you're seeing, has that continued on, or was that just a blip on that year where people were literally stuck at home, or has it continued an increase in domestic violence?
I don't have numbers on hand for an increase, but my sense is it's still going on because there's still a lot more stressors in 2024 than there might have been in 2019, particularly economically. And we know
Certainly.
one of the reasons that people stay with their abusers is often economic. They simply can't afford to leave. Right. So I can't imagine in the current job market and the current economic climate that's changed. It certainly hasn't gotten better for most people. When you can't afford housing, when you can't get a job, how are you supposed to get out?
Yeah, and economy obviously is always the major driver of violent crime in general. It's an economic condition that plays greatly into that. So that's a good point. One thing you've talked about in the past is the fact that if we look at violence against women, generally, and I don't know if this is, you would know more about the actual statistics on this than me, but the threat coming from people around you and people that it's certainly higher for women than it is for men. And while we get hung up all the time about stranger violence, muggers, the neighborhood crackhead robbing you in the Walmart parking lot, and active shooters and all that stuff that the self-defense community thinks about, how real is that, Annette, as far as the majority of violence that plays out is actually somebody that you personally know? Like, are there any clear statistics on that?
There are indeed. The statistics are catching up with us, so we haven't really fully seen the effects of the last 3 or 4 years. But historically, it's been very much true that you are more likely to be the victim of violent crime from somebody you know. Now, when we talk about somebody you know, it's not necessarily a family or a domestic partner or a friend. It could be that neighborhood crackhead that perhaps you've given a couple dollars to once in a while, or you've bought a sandwich for every other week. So those are people who are still familiar to you in some way, who know you in some way, and have access to you in a way that complete strangers do not. Right? That neighborhood crackhead knows who you are because you've been feeding him. You've given him a bottle of water on a hot day, and you kind of think of him as maybe less of a threat because you've been nice to him. He's been nice to you. Maybe not so bad. Or you're a package delivery person, UPS, FedEx, Amazon, whoever else. You might not know their name. But when the same guy comes and delivers a package to you every day and you're signing for packages, or you catch them when they're dropping something off and you're waving to them, there's somebody that you know. And then when we think about that as the whole spectrum of crimes committed by people you know, we already have from the national statistics, which there are some problems with statistical reporting of violent crime, but we have a general idea that about 50% of violent crimes, we know who committed them. They're not an unknown. But of that, 50 or more percent is somebody that the victim knew the perpetrator in some way, shape, or form, whether it was a family member, a domestic partner, all the way down to clergy, things like that. So if we take that and then we consider the approximate half of violent crime where we theoretically don't know who the perpetrator is in their relationship to the victim, I think it would be a safe assumption to say probably at least half of them are also people known to the victim, perpetrators known to the victim, and perhaps higher when you think about the pressure not to report who has done this thing to you.
Certainly. And that's a great point you raise, as far as like domestic abuse and that kind of thing, the majority of which likely goes unreported as it is. And again, to get people past the things we tend to get hung up on, when it focuses on violent crime, the headline catching things, right? The active shooters, etc. And we take that seriously. I want people to understand that. We talk extensively about that particular threat. But when you still look at it, even with the increase there's been in those kind of crimes, it's infinitesimal, the percentile, as opposed to being hurt by, like what we're talking about, somebody you personally know. I know that years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I wrote an article about fire extinguishers and guns, like comparing the dichotomy of the two, right? That, most people would accept that you should have fire extinguishers and fire alarms in your house. And if you don't, that's negligent, quite frankly, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I looked at the CDC and the FBI statistics, etc., and the truth is people are 28 times more likely to be hurt through violence in their home than through a house fire. Now, I was shocked that it's that high, but you can look up the stats on that. What we come back to, though, is some of that would be violent home invasions by, gangs of thugs at 3 a.m. But the majority, realistically, right, is going to be maybe family members, close friends, domestic violence that happens. So certainly you're not 28 times more likely to have a violent home invasion by the, regional drug lords, right, than you are to have a house fire. But in general, violence in the home is that much higher than house fires. And that kind of puts things into perspective, how real this is. This is not an infinitesimal, 1 in a million. People always say, oh, it's 1 in a million. It's not even close to 1 in a million. This is one in a significant number every given year. And we know that, different locations and different society structures and all that plays into this. But I think if we want to be realistic about it, probably the domestic abuse element and domestic violence, I would think probably crosses spectrums pretty well. Is that what you've seen, Annette?
Yeah. It's definitely spectrum crossing. And I want to kind of touch a little bit on the really good point you made about, what are the chances, right? What are the chances of something happening? And why are we preparing or not preparing for things that have the highest probability? So we talk about active shooters. That's probably one of the lowest probability events that any of us could run into unless we hang out in certain neighborhoods around certain people. There's certainly a high correlation between gang activity and drug activity and what we would term as an active shooter. But, there's other crimes that are more likely to happen in the street. And even though we think that violent crime committed by strangers tends to be lower than violent crimes committed by somebody we know, we can still kind of rank what's more likely, what is less likely, what should we prepare more for, what should we prepare less for, or at least understand that in preparing for it, we're preparing for this teensy tiny little chance it might happen. Mm-hmm. Do you need a rifle available in your backpack for an active shooter?
Luke says yes.
I could come up with a scenario. We could all come up with that scenario.
Right.
Is it likely?
Right.
How likely?
Right. Balanced against how much more likely is it potentially to get stolen out of your vehicle, or stolen off you, even if you're carrying it around in a pack, and we go down that rabbit trail of being focused on things that grab the headlines, essentially. Right. So that's a great point. There is a well-known firearms instructor, self-defense instructor, who's been around a long time, who years ago, he wrote an article on his own blog saying essentially that he can't bring himself to advise the armed citizen to train specifically for active shooters, because statistically it is still such an anomaly, even though, yes, it has trended upwards, the amount of incidents that happen every year, but it's still statistically so anomalous that actually dedicating a lot of training time to it, I thought he made a great point that it's not, it should be covered in your overall preparedness, right? And your overall approach to this whole thing. It shouldn't be a dedicated focus necessarily on what we should be doing. What are your thoughts on that?
We only have so many hours in a day, and we only have so much money in our bank accounts. And the first priority for all of us, I think, needs to be spending those resources and that time, that energy, that money on enjoying the life that we have with the people that we love. And I know Melody Lowers talked about this, a whole bunch of other people talked about having a life that's worth protecting. Now, once you do that and you think about what does it take to spend that time with the people you love and have those precious moments with them, and then you go, okay, but I need to protect them. I need to train. How many hours are left? How much money is left? How much energy is left? I train jiu-jitsu 4 or 5 days a week right now. It's a lot of time. I would never be able to do this if I had a normal full-time job that required me to show up in the office, or if I had kids, if I had a less understanding partner who just looks at me and rolls his eyes and go, why are you going to morning class? Like, it's like, get back before you're awake.
Why do you go to morning class? No, joking.
Morning class is awesome. I actually really enjoy
That's
it.
what they all say now.
But it does mean getting to the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So I do that for fun. And you can do whatever you want for fun. I'm not going to judge. Like, if you want to go to fantasy tactical camp on your free weekends, or you want to spend a week, doing CQB, shoot house, whatever, that's on you, right? But is it the best use of your time, energy, and money for the practical purpose of protecting you and yours? And that's where I think it becomes more difficult. At this point, I can't really claim I'm doing jiu-jitsu for self-defense.
Sure.
Primarily anymore. I'm way down. I'm way far beyond the skill set that's truly necessary for self-defense. I do it for fun now. I love jiu-jitsu. And it's one thing to say, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this because I love it. I've got great friends. I'm having a lot of fun. It's another thing to have that as a slog. Is that really what you want to look back on and say, well, at least I spent, 300 hours a year in training?
Yeah, so you raise some good points, and again, you make the good point that it's okay to be an enthusiast about something. Like, if that in and of itself, I mean, I'm all for that, but what I tell guys is, like, I'm a shooting enthusiast, right? So my things that I work on, like trying to get to the point where from concealment, I'm doing a sub 2 second build drill every time. This is so far outside of the realm of the actual gun skills you actually need to defend yourself, right? So I think it's okay to, yeah, exactly. It looks awesome, right? On video. No, but it's like, but it's okay if that's your passion. Like if you like to shoot competition, or if you like to do jiu-jitsu at a high level, but if we give if we give advice to people, like what should we be looking at as an overall skill set package to be able to protect yourself and your loved ones, right? We have to accept that that is not necessarily the best use of time. I remind people that look at the instances we've seen where even really high-level shooting problems, like everybody talks about him, Eli Dickens, stopping an active shooter at 42 yards. The kid never had any formal training, right? So sometimes we kind of lose sight of the fact that, you know, a lot of times it's about having the tool on you, having the guts to use it is really what's important here. So we encourage everybody to get as much training as possible, but we should be realistic, right? And the gun is just one part. And that's one thing, Annette, that I really like about your approach. For you, even though you're a high-level shooter, you make clear it's one part. And if you're talking to our audience saying, this day and age, the limited time and budget we have, what are the important things people should look at to actually invest the limited time, the limited energy, the limited money to best equip themselves for, again, these most likely scenarios that we're looking at? Where do you start? If somebody told you that was serious, not just somebody who said, oh, I'm a little bit scared when I'm jogging at night or something, like somebody who's serious, who says, I want to be serious about this, I want to be prepared for the violence that's in this world, where do I start? No pressure.
There are so many potential answers to that. And what I'll do is kind of touch on each topic that I think is important, and then sort of the base level and the, if you want to be super serious level, but you're not quite an enthusiast yet. So I like to start with the soft skills of self-defense. We will call them avoidance, situational awareness, and all that other stuff. Though I would query how to use situationally aware. But knowing things like what is your risk proposition for where you live, what you do, where you hang out, to understanding what you do that's dangerous and less dangerous, to when do I go places, when do I not go places. I think it's really helpful in this area to get exposure to Craig Douglas's Managing Unknown Contacts material. And I think it's really important here to understand the concept of boundaries and how you set boundaries and how you enforce boundaries. And that goes for familiar people and unfamiliar people. So this sort of soft skills thing, it's just good for your everyday life. It does have to do with self-defense, but it doesn't. Right? So we start there. People always want to get into the hard tools. You know, hard skills are easy to measure, they're easy to practice, they're easier to put on Instagram. So with shooting, because concealed carry, right? This is USA Carry, we'll talk about shooting. The very minimum competency for somebody who wants to carry a gun for self-defense, I look at something like John Dobbs' work about minimum competency. We're looking for safe gun handling skills. And those safe skills include being able to use a holster safely, being able to handle a loaded gun safely and retrieve it safely, like Claude Warner's work, where he notes that perhaps we should have people learning how to take their gun out of the safe when it's loaded to use it for home defense. We talk about, I strongly believe for a long time that you demonstrate your understanding of safe direction by being able to hit a generous target on purpose. So, you know, we can argue about the size of that target, the distance, the time pressure, whatever else. But at the end of the day, you should probably be able to shoot something intentionally versus just spraying bullets. And that's a safety thing beyond just self-defense. If you want to get to a point where I think anybody can get to, and with a reasonable but not a ton of work, we're looking at something like a USPSA C-level shooter, an IDPA marksman, maybe a sharpshooter. I think that that's within the grasp of anybody who wants to put some serious time into the skill. And it's going to put you head and shoulders above most people. Going to the combatives world, the hands-on world, because there is a lot of violence that's hands-on. I think it's something that we really think hard about. The very, very basics. I'm actually putting together a one-day self-defense class right now, and I'm covering and using the ShivWorks program of default cover and survival position. So some really simple techniques to prevent yourself from being knocked out by somebody who's trying to punch you, to not be afraid when somebody knocks you on the ground, to have an idea of something to do, some idea of movement.
Mm-hmm.
In that area, if you want to kind of go the extra step, I think that anybody can probably do 4 to 6 months of jiu-jitsu once or twice a week. That is, I took a college class and sat in on the class, and it seems pretty reasonable to me that most people would be able to take that time in their life to learn how to. It's not about learning a specific submission or learning a specific move. It's about learning how to move under pressure and not be afraid of, some sweaty guy all over you trying to hurt you in some way, even if it's simulated. If you really want to go further, blue belt, I think, is within anybody's grasp. Take a couple of years, but it's not something that requires a ton of talent or skill or anything besides the determination to keep on showing up and pay attention most of the time in class. Beyond that, we've got stuff like pepper spray and things like that I think are really basic skills as long as you're willing to just take the time to learn them. I could teach somebody pepper spray in half an hour. Yeah. And that's with a lot of chatter, right? Like if I needed to, I have a postcard out there that shows people how to do it in a 4x6 postcard. So you just have to take the time to do it, and I would call that negligible. So that would be my self-defense guideline, I guess, on the areas of things you should learn and where you can go with them.
Yeah. You mentioned the soft skills, the whole muck paradigm. So that was really synthesized. It's not that the principles were invented, but a well-known instructor named Craig Douglas really synthesized the whole approach to managing the encroachment of potentially dangerous people. And, this, if I had to say, if I could, somebody I love and care about, right? And if they told me I will only commit 4 hours to learning something to protect myself, I would rather see them spend the 4 hours just learning that. And I think his block is actually 4 hours on that, is I recall, than just about anything else. And, people don't realize how important it is and how useful the skill is when you're somebody like myself has spent as much time as I have in Baltimore and some other questionable places. There is nothing, this isn't hypothetical stuff at all. Like every one of these scenarios that they will throw at you, the approach mechanisms, etc. I've seen all of them. I've seen every one of them. Do you have the time? Can I ask you something?
My dog is
all of
lost.
those. My dog is lost. Is this your dog? It's not hypothetical. And going through a block of instruction like that really puts you ahead of the curve. Again, if you grow up maybe in certain inner cities, you might learn all of that through direct experience, but short of that, that muck is really a great block of instruction, and then don't get knocked out. Don't get knocked out. And that is a big one. I don't understand. It's something that doesn't seem to come innately to people, of actually having your hands up when somebody who's acting hostile closes distance with you, so yeah, just to reiterate what you're touching on there.
Yeah. I actually do I've done a short block that's pepper spray and muck. And I think that is sort of, if I had, as you say, if I had 4 hours with somebody, what am I going to teach them? That's really where I'm going to focus, as well as some concept of outlining the problem and how you can understand what your risks are and how to mitigate them.
Brilliant.
So, the other thing with muck that is really useful, at least it was for me, is really it's a boundary drawing exercise, right? You ask somebody, you tell them, you give them a line essentially, and If they stay away from that line, we're cool. If they cross that line, what are you going to do about it? And a lot of people don't really understand how boundaries work in an articulable way. So having muck as a framework to understand boundaries, I think, is really useful in the non-stranger sense as well. So that you understand, like, hey, every friend group has that creepy person, right? There's always somebody who's just a little bit too close, a little bit too much.
The guy who tags along with somebody you know, who gives everybody the creeps, right?
So if you apply the muck paradigm, where you apply, normal boundary setting skills, hey man, you're not really invited on this one. Hey, could you please stop coming with us? Please stop sitting so close to me. No, you cannot sit next to me. What are you going to do after that?
Right.
Maybe you move and remove yourself. Maybe you make a bigger deal out of it. But if nothing else, you could articulate to people, hey, I told him I did not want him sitting next to me at any event, and he keeps doing that. That is not okay.
Right. And what you're talking about, I always encourage people to read Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear. Yes, I get it. I hate his politics too, right? So we know where he stands on guns, which is bizarre. But regardless, the mindset stuff in that book, one of the things he mentions, and he has mentioned this in the speeches he gives as well, is human beings are the only species where the female of the species will get into an elevator, which is a sealed metal box, with a male of the species that she gets really bad vibes from, just to come off as being polite, to avoid being rude, and it's totally counterintuitive to the survival mechanism. Where do you come down on that? What do you tell women as far as being able to, because I know it's not as simple as just like a lot of times it's said, just give yourself permission to be
leave.
rude, but what's your suggestion with that?
A little bit of white lying can be okay. So absolutely, it's okay to be rude. Hands down, it is fine to be like, give that face and walk right out. It is fine to say, no, I don't want to get on that elevator with you. But it's also okay to say, I'm waiting for a friend. Oops,
or I forgot something in the office.
My car.
Right, yeah.
Or at the office.
Yeah.
It is okay to do that. And if it makes it a little easier for you and it's a little bit more authentic to you to do that, then why not?
Yes. Excellent advice. So before we wrap this up, Luke, I know you have a burning question for Annette related to purse carry.
Yeah, so there was a incident last week or within the last 2 weeks. So a woman had a non-holstered gun in her purse, reached in her purse to grab her keys. Gun went off, negligent discharge, and shot and fatally killed her, or fatally shot her 13-year-old daughter, I believe it was a daughter. So what are your thoughts on purse carry and recommendations, if you have any? Kind of take it from there.
I will not tell you not to purse carry. We'll start there. I will tell you purse carry is actually one of the hardest forms of concealed carry. It's really, really difficult to do right. So it's not some kind of shortcut, well, I don't have to learn how to conceal my gun. I don't have to figure out an enigma or wear pants with belt loops. It is hard to purse carry, and you need to keep that in mind. Beyond that, there's some basic safety features and safety habits that anybody who wants to carry a gun off body needs to keep in mind, including things like keeping control over the purse, because you are carrying a gun around. So you need to treat it like you are carrying something very valuable and very dangerous around. Not leaving it on the back of your chair at a restaurant, not leaving it on the couch at your friend's house. It's a gun, and you need to treat it like that. The incident that you're talking about, one of the things that would really have helped is if the gun was in a separate pocket, and that separate pocket had some form of trigger protection for the firearm. So a hard Kydex holster, a trigger guard, There are soft holsters that would be adequate inside a purse, inside a properly constructed pocket that is separate, so that there's no possible way that there could be any interference with the trigger. So by having it in a separate pocket, you can't be digging around in there for something and accidentally you're gone. And by protecting the trigger, by keeping the gun in a known orientation, you're less likely, again, to accidentally get your gun, accidentally press the trigger on it. So from a safety perspective, I think those are the absolute minimums. There's a lot that goes into how do you draw safely, how do you pick a good concealed carry bag, how do you make sure it's actually going to work. But at a very, very minimum, if it's, I want to throw a gun in my purse and carry it with me, and I'm not prepared to do any of the other work, you got to make sure you're treating that purse like it's something important that nobody else can touch. And there's going to be no exceptions to that. Right. So there's no, well, it's okay. It's I'm at my friend's house. I'll leave it on the couch. There's no, well, my kid knows not to go into that pocket when they're getting gum out of my purse. None of that. And that separate pocket is really important, and that trigger protection is really important. And within that separate pocket and trigger protection, to the extent that you can keep your gun in a set orientation inside that pocket, whether it's by the size of the pocket or by how you secure the holster inside it or something else, all of those things, that's the safety aspect of it. The rest of it, including whether or not you're sweeping somebody on the draw, we can work on that later.
Right. And this is actually a really timely discussion. It's not just that we wanted to hit on this with you because of this recent incident, but, as people feel more and more afraid, we definitely see more and more carry in non-conventional carry modes. There's no denying that. And this is becoming more and more universal because more men are carrying off body now with things like the Vertex bags and a variety of others that really build bags to accommodate the carry of firearms, where for a long time it was, purse carry. Women will opt for that if they can't hide the gun on their person with what they're dressed at the moment. But definitely men are doing it more and more often. I think there's a lot of benefit that comes with it. One of the things that we see in society is really, for men or women, carrying bags in public places is generally considered socially acceptable now, where years ago it just wasn't. And that's something as armed citizens we can certainly leverage. I still always err on the side, I want it on my body if that's an option, but I'm not diametrically, opposed to off-body carry if you're doing it safely. So, one of the things that it can accommodate is obviously the larger gun than maybe you would be stuck carrying something very small, right? I imagine especially with for women, if you have to be dressed like professionally, etc., it's got to get to the point where it gets more and more difficult to conceal on body.
Yeah, but the bags, you still need to be able to get your hand into the bag, get a firm grip on the gun, and pull the gun out with your hand fisted like that. Mm-hmm. So you might be surprised at the size of bag that you need for a larger gun. That said, it is easier because you don't have to think about how today's outfit is going to work with the gun that you carry normally. And with the advent of what I would call the hybrid off carry, where it's a separate bag but you attach it to your body, I think that changes the equation a little bit too. It's like the hip bags, the fanny packs, or the like the urban bags that are across the chest. Things like that, where you might run into the occasional social friction of, well, why didn't you take that off when you sat down in a restaurant? But you can probably get away with that a little bit more. And it is easier in terms of you don't have to figure out how today's clothing interacts with your gun in your holster.
Annette, let me push you a little further on that. How much of a concern is it, especially if you're in crowded areas, on crowded streets, the stop and grab muggings where criminal actors will just try to take the bag and run off as quickly as possible? This is obviously a concern that has to be taken into account, correct? If you're purse carrying, or how does that factor into these other things that attach more securely then?
This is a interesting topic that I used to discuss with Kathy Jackson, because she was the first person to tell me that slash-proof straps are not a good idea on a carry purse. Because, of course, the prevailing wisdom a decade ago was we wanted those slash-proof straps because then nobody could come through, slash the strap on your purse and take your purse with your gun in it. And she pointed out and showed me some really compelling videos of purse snatchings gone wrong, where a person would run by, snatch the purse, and keep going whether or not you were attached to that purse.
Please.
So, like, you're carrying that strap cross body, and they just take off, dragging you with them. And in cases like that, you kind of go, maybe I don't want a strap that's impossible to break or cut. Maybe I want them to be able to do that so that I'm not caught in that kind of situation.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a lot of food for thought, and probably one of the first times I started thinking about maybe the conventional wisdom isn't always right, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So how does that change now? Some of it's different because we're carrying these like off on body things where they're much closer to the body in the kinds of environments where a lot more people are doing it regularly. So you're not being targeted as a tourist or something like that just because you're wearing even like a fanny pack. In the right environments, you and everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think be thoughtful about your social camouflage is the biggest one.
It is.
You know, what kinds of bags look like they're in place, whether by style or by decoration or something else. The joke used to be, you know, the Maxpedition Fat Boy. Everybody knows there's a gun in it.
Right.
Well, now you can get, you know, some stylish motorcycle chic hit bag that kind of does the same thing. And then you're going to have to take care of that bag and its attachment to you like any other bag that holds valuables.
Yeah, and then some, right? Because now we're talking about arming a violent criminal actor if we let that bag go to them. But it's interesting you talking about the, you know, slash proof or not to use a slash proof strap. My favored carry bag, it's a sling bag. It's, I forget the brand, but a lot of them have this now. They actually have a button right on the buckle that you can release that strap just like that for exactly that instance. You know, I don't think most people realize how vulnerable you can be when somebody grabs you by the bag and you've got a strap around your neck, you know. So it's definitely a potential issue. All right, so this has been fantastic information, Annette. We really appreciate it. Some great advice to our audience. Tell us what you're up to, where people can follow you one last time.
So the easiest way to find me is to check out onherown.life or On Her Own Life on pretty much every social media platform. I will say I'm not as active as I've been in the past, but I am around and I could certainly be reached. The most current project I have going is I have a series coming out through InRange TV that you can see on their YouTube channel and on their Patreon, where they're getting early releases of my thoughts about using knives in concealed carry and self-defense.
We'll have the links to all of those in the show descriptions below.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. We didn't get into the knife thing.
Oh, there's plenty there. The first episode just came out at the end of March here.
Yeah. So knives are interesting, and we'll have you back on sometime to talk about knives as well, I believe.
Always happy to.
Been a great show. We appreciate it, and a lot of great information for our people to consider as we head into a fairly uncertain future, it appears. But I remind everybody, the world's always been a dangerous place, right? Let's stay practical and realistic about it. But some great advice tonight. Thank you again. And until next week, everybody stay safe.
For sure. See y'all next week.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat with you too, and I hope to see you again soon.